Hi all, welcome back. Today we have an exciting topic to discuss that is essential for any data analyst or data scientist. Specifically, we will be diving into the powerful PROC SURVEYSELECT feature in SAS, which allow us to efficiently select samples from a dataset using various sampling techniques. Before we delve into the specifics, let me provide you an overview of what we will cover in this tutorial. First, we will explore the concept of sampling technique and why it is crucial in statistical analysis. And then we will use PROC SURVEYSELECT procedure that how to implement that particular sampling strategy by using PROC SURVEYSELECT. Some of you might be wondering, why should we use PROC SURVEYSELECT instead of other sampling methods available in SAS? Well, PROC SURVEYSELECT offers several advantages. It allows us to select samples with ease, taking into account complex designs such as stratification and clustering. It also provides options for setting seeds, specifying sample sizes, and implementing systematic or proportion to size sampling. In short, it equips with a wide range of tools to tailor our sampling approach to meet our research needs. Before we start a discussion on various sampling strategies and how we can implement them by using PROC SURVEYSELECT in SAS, let's see how our data looks like. The dataset which we are going to work on, you can find it in SAS help library. We are going to use baseball dataset. Here I am going to create a test dataset. Let's see how many number of records are there and what is the data type of the variables. So I have used PROC content procedure and there are 322 observations with 24 variables are there, and you can see all the variables and their data types here. Now we will use PROC print statement to see how our data looks like. So you can see here, these are the first 10 observations from our dataset test. There is a name of the players, what team they are playing for, number of bats, number of hits, home runs, and other variables. The first sampling strategy which we are going to discuss is simple random sampling. Simple random sampling is a sampling technique where each individual or element in the population has an equal chance of being selected for the sample. It involves randomly selecting a specified number of observations from the population without a specific criteria or stratification. Now let's see how we can do simple random sampling using PROC SURVEYSELECT procedure. So I'm going to call PROC SURVEYSELECT data equal to test. Now in the method option, I'm going to call SRS, which stands for simple random sampling. The sample size is going to be 50. You can put up 60 or 70, but you cannot go beyond 322 because that is the dataset with all the observation we have. So here I am selecting 50 sample size, and that is why I have mentioned here sam size is equal to 50. Seed, you can put up anything. I am putting up here 42. The reason is when you put up a seed, it is going to reproduce the same sample any number of the time you are going to run the code. Otherwise, what will happen if you are not going to put up the seed, the code is going to generate different sample data set, and that is the only reason why we put up the seed. And run. So there is no warning in our log windows, and you can see here the input data set is test, selection method is simple random sampling, sample size is 50, and this is the probability of selecting any observation. So it is 0.15528. There is one mistake I did not mention the output data set. Out equal to sample underscore SRS. Otherwise, if you see here, the output data set called data1. We could have used this one also to see how the data looks like. Otherwise, it is always good to mention the output data set. In our case, it is going to be sample underscore SRS. Let me run the code. Now, let's see how our data looks like. PROC print data equal to sample underscore SRS, run, and you can see here it has 50 observations. So this is how one can use PROC SURVEYSELECT to conduct simple random sampling in SAS. Now, one more thing which I would like to mention, there are so many variables here. Let's say you want to select only certain number of the variables in your sample dataset. What we can do here, I can use ID option, name, team, and hits, and runs, division, and let's say div, and one more, log salary. Let's read on the code. And you can see here, this time we have got an output data set with only selected number of variables, which we have mentioned here in ID options. Another random sampling which is very popular is called random sampling with replacement. In random sampling with replacement, each observation in a dataset has an equal chance to be selected, and it can be selected over and over again. Let's see how we can conduct random sampling with replacement in SAS. I'm going to call PROC SURVEYSELECT data equal to test, out equal to sample underscore SRS underscore replace. Now, method I'm going to use is URS, which stands for unrestricted sampling. Sam size equal to 50, seed equal to 42, and let's run the code. Or let me put up ID method also, because then we can focus only on limited number of variables. No error here, you can see in the log window, and you can see we have done unrestricted random sampling, which basically is random sampling with replacement. Test data set, random seed is 42, sample size is 50. Now let me show you something interesting. Let me print the records for sample underscore SRS underscore replace, and you will not see all the 50 records. You can see here there are only 47 records. So when we use PROC SURVEYSELECT for random sampling with replacement, PROC SURVEYSELECT remove all the duplicate records from the output dataset. Now let's say if you want to see all the records, even though they are duplicate, one can use out hits option. So what we can do here, if I mention out hits, so again sample size is 50, and this time all the 50 records are there. Now let's see which of them are duplicates. See, Strawberry Daryl, that is a duplicate record. Where is the other one? Kachar Randy and Gwen Tony. So those three are the duplicate records. If we have not used the out hits option, those records would be dropped when we are going to use PROC SURVEYSELECT with method equal to URS. Another sampling technique which we are going to discuss is systematic sampling. Systematic sampling involves selecting every kth element from the population dataset after randomly selecting a starting point. It is often used when the population is ordered in some way, such as by the time or ID, and the elements are evenly distributed throughout the population. Now let's do an example and see how we can conduct systematic sampling using PROC SURVEYSELECT. What I'm going to do here, I'm going to copy this code to save time, and let me change the output dataset name. It is sample underscore sys. Most important thing is the method. method equal to sys. This is used to conduct systematic sampling in SAS. So that is the main thing which we are going to change here to conduct systematic sampling. Now let me copy the proc print statement and let me change the dataset name and let us run the code. And here you can see the selection method is systematic random sampling. Random seed is 42, sample size is 50, and the output dataset is sample underscore sys, and these are the 50 records in a sample dataset. And this is how one can conduct systematic sampling in SAS using PROC SURVEYSELECT procedure. Next sampling strategy which we are going to discuss is stratified random sampling. Stratified random sampling involves dividing the population into homogeneous subgroups based on certain characteristics such as age, gender, or location. In our case, it can be division, league, div, etc. Then within each stratum, a simple random sample is taken, and this ensures that each subgroup is adequately represented in the sample, allowing for more precise estimate for subgroups of interest. Now let's see how we can conduct stratified random sampling in SAS. But here is one thing. When we have to conduct stratified random sampling, we need to sort our dataset on the basis of a certain subgroup, which is basically going to be the categorical variable. Now let's see how we can do that. Proc equal, let me show you what variable we are going to use. Select distinct div from test. So you can see here there are 4 categories: AE, AW, NE and NW. So this is the subgroup which is an area of interest for us to conduct stratified random sampling. Now let us sort this dataset. Proc sort data equal to test by dev, and let's run the code. Now let me copy this piece of the code to save some time, and let us make some changes. So the output dataset name I'm going to change to sample underscore strata. Method is going to be SRS, and here we are going to call a new option called strata, and we have sorted this data on the basis of our categorical variable div, which I'm going to call here div. And let me use this proc print statement to show you how our data looks like. So if you remember, there are 4 categories in div categorical variable, and let me change the data here. When we are going to conduct stratified random sampling in SAS, this is going to give us 200 records because there are 4 categories. So for every category there are going to be 50 records, and since there are 4, there are going to be 200 records in our sample dataset. Let us run the code and show you the output. So this is how we conduct stratified random sampling in SAS. Selection method is simple random sampling, but it has mentioned the strata variable, which is a div category on which we have sorted our dataset. And you can see here the usual things like input dataset is test, random say there's 42, stratum sample size is 50. So for every subgroup there are going to be 50 sample size, and number of strata is 4, total sample size is 200, and output dataset is sample underscore strata. And this is how our data looks like, and there are 200 records in our sample dataset. So this is how one can conduct stratified random sampling using PROC SURVEYSELECT procedure in SAS. Now let's discuss about cluster sampling. Cluster sampling involves dividing the population into clusters or groups, often based on geographical proximity or natural groupings. Instead of sampling individual elements entirely, clusters are randomly selected, and all observations within the selected clusters are included in the sample. Now let's see how we can conduct cluster sampling in SAS. Let me copy this piece of code and let me change the name of output data set sample underscore cluster. Method is equal to SRS. Sample size, let me put up sample rate. So rate means that how much is the percentage of sample data set we are going to use to conduct a sampling. So here I'm going to say sample rate is 10% and cluster def. And by the way, we do not need to sort the data when we have to conduct cluster sampling. Now let me copy this proc print statement and change my dataset name, and let's run the code. So you can see here the selection method is simple random sampling, but the sampling unit variable, which is a new category, is div, and sampling rate is 10%, sample size is 1, selection probability is 0.25, and you can see this is how our data looks like. There are 72 records. And this is how one can conduct cluster sampling in SAS. And by the way, it is not a very popular sampling methodology to conduct sampling in the real world. But one can do cluster sampling using PROC SURVEYSELECT procedure in SAS. Now let's discuss about probability proportional to size sampling, also known as PPS sampling. PPS sampling is a technique where the probability of selecting each element is directly proportional to the measure of importance in the population. Elements with layer sizes have a higher chance of being selected. PPS sampling is often used when the population element have a different probability of selection based on their known sizes. Now let's do an example and see how we can conduct PPS sampling in SAS. Now let me copy this piece of code to save some time, and let me change the output dataset name to PPS. Now notice here method is going to be PPS, and I'm going to change sam size equal to 50, and let me change cluster diff to size. And now when we are going to use size option in PROC SURVEYSELECT for PPS sampling, we have to use a numerical variable. So for us, it is going to be n hits. You can use n runs or anything else, whatever the numerical variable you want to analyze or the measure of importance you want to give for PPS sampling. Now let me copy this proc print statement, and the dataset name is going to be sample underscore PPS, and now let's run the code. So you can see here selection method is PPS without replacement, size measure is n hits, output dataset is sample underscore PPS, and sample size is 50. And this is an output dataset, and you can see here there are two additional variables, selection probability and sampling weight. And this is how you can see the measure of importance given on the basis of the variable n hits, which we have mentioned in the size option in PROC SURVEYSELECT procedure. So you can analyze this dataset, and this is how one can conduct PPS sampling in SAS using PROC SURVEYSELECT procedure. The last sampling method which we are going to discuss is systematic PPS sampling. Systematic sampling with probability proportional to size combines the principle of systematic sampling with PPS sampling. It involves selecting every kth element from the population where the value of k is determined based on the size of the element. Now let's see how we can conduct systematic PPS sampling in SAS. Let me copy this piece of code, and let me change the name of output dataset to sample underscore sys underscore PPS, and method is going to be PPS underscore sys. Sam size is equal to 50, seed equal to 42, size is n hits, everything looks fine. Let me copy the proc print statement, and let me change the name of the dataset to sample underscore sys underscore PPS, and now let's run the code. So here you can see selection method is PPS systematic, size measure is n hits, and these are your 50 records. And in this way one can conduct systematic sampling with PPS in SAS. I hope you find this video informative and valuable. Sampling is a crucial component of statistical analysis, and PROC SURVEYSELECT provides us with a powerful tool set to efficiently extract representative sample from a dataset. So go ahead and put your newfound knowledge into action. Remember to like this video and subscribe to our channel for more SAS tutorials. Until next time, happy analyzing.